IHMS.
Open letter to the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Dr. Abiye Ahmed. Dear Prime Minister, every minority has a precious history. Minority right is human right, and minorities are a true test for democracy. Be on the side of truth always, as justice comes from doing the right things. Truly, protecting minorities is your duty and responsibility, but signing them off is inhumanity. I begin my letter by just asking you, do not be the last Ethiopian leader to sign off my political extinction. My name is Miss Amana, which literally means guardianship, or Adera in Amharic, and I am your second daughter's age. I might not be as lucky as she is, because I belong naturally to minority of minorities group in Ethiopia. Why am I from minority of minorities? I will explain soon, but your urgent political wisdom and humanity may save my extinction. I am a fifth-generation Harari, facing generational internal and external persecutions. Starting from my great-great-grandfather to myself, we were internally displaced, became refugees, and immigrated to foreign lands. Of course, within a series of political turmoil in Ethiopia. Most of the times, as minority, directly attacked and pushed out of our homeland, Harar, and our home country, Ethiopia. What made us minority of minorities? As you already know from historical facts, Harar was once a mighty country with its own governance structures, financial systems, coinage, education, and civilization, before Addis Ababa and Nairobi came to light. In a nutshell, Harar was the center of knowledge, trade, development, and peace. Unfortunately, all these were taken away because of series of persecutions over years. Here are some highlights for you. Persecution number 1, my great-grandfather. The beginning of the 19th century was the starting point of our extinction. My great-great-grandfather was an educator and entrepreneur. His land and properties were confiscated, and he was persecuted by the then Emperor Menelik, who bragged in his letter written to the British consulate in Aden on February 1887. This is the letter, quote, "From Menelik, King of Shoa and of all the Gala, good and bad. To the English consul at Aden, how are you? By the grace of God I am well. Amir Abdullahi would suffer no Christian in his country. He was another, Quran, but by the help of God I fought him, destroyed him, and he escaped alone on horseback. I hoisted my flag in his capital, and my troops occupied his city. Quran died, but Abdullahi could not be his successor. This is not a Muslim country, as everyone knows. Signed, Menelik." End quote. Also from the Addis Ababa University archives, there is another letter written to his wife, clearly messaging to her how he slaughtered many Muslims and Hararis. It was a bloodbath, and a one-of-its-kind atrocity in Ethiopian history. Thereafter, my great-great-grandfather and Hararis alike, punished, displaced, and an assorted, systematic ethnic cleansing began. Persecution number 2, my great-grandfather. In the 1940s and 1950s, during Haile Selassie's regime, my great-grandfather was imprisoned in notorious prisons of Debre Marcos and Jimma because of his involvement in a peaceful movement in defending the rights of Hararis and Harar. After languishing for so many years in prisons, he was released with a warning not to go back to Harar. Internally displaced, and he remained in Jimma and the surrounding towns until his last days. Persecution number 3, my grandfather. Following my great-grandfather, the internal displacement continued with my grandfather, who ended up roaming for a livelihood throughout Ethiopia, except Harar. The Haile Selassie regime systematically persecuted all Hararis and deprived everything Harari, which really made Harar on the verge of collapse. He was cut off from Harar and his family was marginalized and assimilated, diminishing our cultural values, our Islamic religion, the Harari language, and the heritage in general. It meant getting closer to the next level of extinction. Persecution number 4. My father. After all these internal displacements and persecutions by imperial regimes, here came the late 1970s and early 1980s, the era of military rule and dictatorship, where land and properties were confiscated and assorted human atrocities took place. Also, your brother's story relates to this. The Red Terror touched almost all households in Ethiopia. These forced my dad to an exodus. He became a refugee in neighboring countries and later immigrated to the Western world. The generational executions, from internal displacements to immigration, terrorized and forcefully pushed to the verge of extinction in our own homeland, Harar. Persecution number 5. My generation. Ethiopia is incomplete without minorities, and being Ethiopian is meaningless without diversity. Though I try my best to keep my heritage as both Harari and Ethiopian wherever I am, there is a huge threat lingering over Harar. I will be nobody without Harar. If Harar exists, then my heritage and myself do continue to exist and become a complete Ethiopian. I am in touch with Ethiopia. So often visit and follow its discourses. Ethiopia is a land of diversity and minorities, and debasing such beauty is inhumanity. Imagine, while I am struggling not to be swallowed by the veneer of the Western world, my Harar is being wiped out of the political map by fellow so-called public servants and extreme Ethiopianists, and so are several minorities across the country. Ethiopia without its peoples would not be a country. Atrocious public servants, such as Birtukan Mideksa, are an existential threat to my generation. All in all, these series of visible and invisible atrocities, through demographic manipulations, through displacement of indigenous Hararis, settlement of non-Hararis, and unlawfully abusing Harari rights, as shown in the recent National Election Board attempting to politically strangle Hararis, all amount to silent genocide. Harar has tried to recuperate from such persecutions and brutalities, and more than ever, Hararis and Harar are being politically threatened and persecuted repeatedly. Harar's continuation as a tiny entity needs your protection, as King Najashi protected a handful of Muslims back then. Responsible and humane leadership always protects the powerless from abusive internal authorities and political criminals. The chairwoman of the National Election Board of Ethiopia is illegally and inhumanely determined to wipe out political Harar. I plead with you, because you know what it means to be persecuted, marginalized, and assimilated, since you belong to a highly persecuted and hated segment of Ethiopia's population. The chairwoman is a vanguard of silent genocide. She has become an institution by herself, and acting above the institution she is heading. Even worrisome, she is acting above the laws of the land, and the Constitution and legal institutions, as she is at loggerheads with all. Look at the decisions made against her in favor of Harar's rights and election matters. From Federation House, the Supreme Court of Ethiopia, Court of Appeals, Courts of Validation, to Sabar Court decision made the 27th of May, 2021. Who is incompetent, the judges or her? In fact, all of her documented actions amount to hatred, discrimination, and inhumanity. Her soul is inhumanity. She is an existential threat to minorities in Ethiopia. She is defying national and international laws, such as minority right is human right. Her hate, arrogance, ignorance, and unforgiveness are imploding in all directions. This is where your actions are urgently needed to stop her from illegally erasing and undermining the existence of minorities. Abusing Harar's rights are indicative of intended crime against all minorities in the country. As witnessed by all, Harar is a visible peace. Harar is a threat to nobody or no entity. Hararis walk with moderate manners. They are people with balance and fairness in their intentions and actions. They give happiness to many, though they were treated miserably. They made people laugh, though they were made to cry. However, Harar will continue to be an invaluable social, economic, and political hub, as well as civilization asset. As I conclude in seeking your urgent attention to prevent authorities from such humanity and rights abuses, also, I just want to bring your attention to some experiences from other countries around the world. How minorities are delicately handled and treated with affirmative actions, and even some are accorded to the minorities' veto power. Beyond Ethiopia, there are many countries around the globe that supported and established minority self-governing territories or parliamentary seats or administrative entities within their borders. To name a few, Norway, for Sami social groups, the population is 80,000. Sweden, for Sami social groups, the population is 20,000. Italy, for Vatican State, with a population of 2,500. Slovenia, for minority Italian origin, population of 4,000. Poland, for a German minority, a population of 4,300. And New Zealand, for the Maori, the population of 600,000. And Pakistan, for non-Muslim social groups, amounting to less than 2% of the population. Colombia, South Africa, Fiji, Singapore, Canada, Spain, Nigeria, and many others have taken affirmative actions and uphold minority rights in support of the minorities running their own affairs within their borders. Using this opportunity, I would like to commend and appreciate all those judges in all those courts for standing against social injustice. They have protected the minorities by doing the right thing, actually fulfilling God's message. Protect minorities and the powerless. Judges in various courts stood up for and protected minority groups. Mahatma Gandhi made a distinction between higher courts in the land and the courts of mindsets. He once said, "There is a higher court than courts of justice, and that is the court of conscience. It supersedes all other courts." With their conscience, all the judges have ruled against her and stood up for minorities today. Justice and truth always prevail. Expecting your ethical and civic-minded, dear Prime Minister, do not sign off my political extinction. Let me grow with your daughters, please. Thank you in advance. Signed, Miss Amana Ahmed Al-Abadir, CC. The Prime Minister's Daughters, care of Eden Abiy, the Federation House of Ethiopia, the Supreme Court of Ethiopia, Court of Appeals, Courts of Validation, and Sabar Court, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, the Ministry of Peace, the President of Harari Regional State, the UN Commission on Human Rights, its Subcommission on Prevention of Discrimination and Protection of Minorities, the International Commission of Jurists, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, various diplomatic missions and embassies, and major media outlets like Al Jazeera, BBC, France 24, CNN, and more.
IHMS